They said he was lazy, a boy who would never amount to anything, a dreamer who refused to work, a wild spirit without direction. But fate had other plans. This is the story of Simon Kenton, how a scorned farm boy transformed into one of the greatest frontiersmen of his time. A journey forged in hardship, fueled by defiance and destined for legend. Stay with me, because this is where it all begins. Life in colonial America was harsh, especially for those who labored on the land. Survival depended on discipline, hard work, and a willingness to endure. But some men were not built for the plow. Some men were made for something greater, something untamed. Simon Kenton, a restless young boy from Virginia, was one of them. Though he was raised to work the fields, his heart longed for the wild, for the unknown lands beyond the horizon. This is the story of how a rebellious boy, seen as worthless by his family and peers, found his true calling in the vast, untamed frontier. The air was thick with the scent of freshly turned soil, sweat, and the lingering smoke of the morning cookfire. On the Kenton farm, toil was the only currency, and every hand, young or old, was expected to contribute. Yet one pair of hands consistently found ways to be elsewhere. Simon Kenton, nearly 15, was already a towering figure, his broad frame hinting at the man he would become. But to those who knew him, he was nothing more than a shiftless boy, a dreamer with no use for honest work. "Lazy," his father would mutter, shaking his head. "That boy will never amount to anything." His mother worried, his brothers scoffed, and the neighbors cast knowing glances. Simon did little to prove them wrong. He could sit idle as the rest of the family hoed the fields, tensed his back against labor as if the weight of a mattock or hoe was unbearable. The sting of a hickory switch did little to correct his ways. Whenever the whippings became too harsh, he would vanish for days, surviving in the wilderness until hunger drove him home. Simon Kenton was not made for farm work. Simon had no interest in plowing fields or tending tobacco. He was made for something else. He just didn't know it yet. When he ran, he felt free. The forests and rivers spoke to him, teaching him lessons that no schoolhouse or fieldwork could. He knew where the deer bedded down, how to track a rabbit across damp earth, and how to move silent as a shadow through the underbrush. Yet none of that mattered in a world that measured a man by the crops he could bring to harvest and the calluses on his hands. His fascination with the unknown was fueled by Thomas Kenton, his uncle, an experienced Indian trader who frequently visited the family. Uncle Tom spoke of the middle ground, the vast, untamed land beyond the Ohio River, where adventure and danger walked hand in hand. He had traveled with famous explorers like John Finley and David Duncan, sharing tales of towering forests, buffalo herds, and native warriors who claimed the land as their own. These stories planted a seed in Simon's heart, one that would one day pull him away from the life he knew. Then came Ellen Cummins. She was older than him, sharper-tongued than she was pretty, but to Simon, she was the light of his world. She laughed at his wildness, admired his defiance of convention. When she spoke of a future, Simon believed, foolishly, that she saw him in it. But the future had never belonged to boys like Simon Kenton. It belonged to men who worked, who stood with squared shoulders and heads held high. Men like William Leachman. Leachman was everything Simon was not. Responsible, educated, steady. And when Simon learned that Ellen was to be married to him, the ground beneath his feet gave way. Rage burned in his chest, wild and uncontainable. He fled to the hills, disappearing for days, but the anger only festered. When he finally returned, it was to the wedding itself, where he burst through the church doors, bare-chested and furious. The challenge was foolish. Simon was a boy, Leachman was a man. The fight lasted only long enough for Leachman's fists to leave Simon bloody and broken in front of the entire congregation. Humiliated, Simon withdrew. But this time, something shifted. He did not simply lick his wounds and wallow in self-pity. He steeled himself. He would not be a laughingstock again. He would train, grow stronger, learn to fight, to endure. No one would ever make him feel small again. Tecumseh's birth, the rise of a warrior. As Simon Kenton struggled with his own fate across the Ohio River, another legend was being born. On January 30th, 1771, in a Shawnee village along the Scioto River, Methotassah, wife of Chief Puxinwa, gave birth to a son. As the child entered the world, a meteor blazed across the sky, a sign the tribe believed of his destiny. He was named Tecumseh. Puxinwa, a respected warrior, believed his son was meant for greatness. Though their paths would not cross for many years, Tecumseh and Simon Kenton were bound by the same land, the same struggles, and the same fight for survival. A fugitive's flight. A year after his humiliation, Simon finally got his revenge. He encountered Leachman alone in the woods and attacked. This time, Simon did not lose. The fight was brutal, and when it was over, Leachman lay bloodied and still. Panic seized Simon. Had he killed him? He ran. Shoeless, hatless, with nothing but the clothes on his back, Simon Kenton fled into the unknown. His old life, his family, his home. All were lost. He was a fugitive now, heading westward toward a land he had only ever heard of in stories. A land where men became legends, where the wilderness shaped those who dared to challenge it. He was no longer Simon Kenton. He took a new name, Simon Butler. The name was a shield, a new identity to hide from the law or any retribution that might come his way. If anyone asked, Simon Kenton had never existed. Simon Butler, however, was a man looking to forge his own path. His journey westward led him to Warm Springs, a small outpost where weary travelers and hopeful settlers paused before continuing deeper into the frontier. Hungry and desperate, Simon sought work anywhere he could find it. That was when he met Jacob Butler, a grizzled miller with a sharp eye and a firm handshake. Jacob was no fool. He saw the rough edges of the young man before him, the bruises on his knuckles, the way his eyes darted about as if expecting trouble. But he also saw potential. "You willing to work?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Simon nodded. "Yes, sir. Hard as any man." And so Simon Butler became the miller's apprentice. He hauled grain, repaired the grinding wheels, and learned the trade of turning raw harvest into flour. It was exhausting work, but for the first time in his life, he had something resembling stability. More importantly, he had a purpose. Marmaduke Van Swearingen, Blue Jacket. While Simon Kenton sought to forge his identity in the wilderness, another young man was undergoing a transformation of his own. Marmaduke Van Swearingen, known as Duke to those who knew him, had always been different from the other frontier settlers. Tall, strong, and quick-witted, he had an admiration for the ways of the Shawnee that many could not understand. Unlike others who feared the native tribes, Duke respected them, studied their ways, and longed to live as they did. One fateful day, Duke was captured by a group of Shawnee warriors. Instead of resisting, he embraced their customs and, over time, earned their respect. He was adopted into the Shawnee Nation and given the name Blue Jacket. The transformation was complete. Marmaduke Van Swearingen ceased to exist, and in his place stood a Shawnee warrior who would become one of their greatest leaders. Though their paths had yet to cross, both Simon Kenton and Blue Jacket were walking parallel roads, shaped by the same frontier that demanded strength, resilience, and an unbreakable will to survive. Meeting Jacob Greathouse and Bill Grills. As Simon Butler settled into his new life at the mill, he spent his evenings listening to the conversations of travelers who stopped in Warm Springs. Tales of the untamed frontier, rich hunting grounds, and hidden dangers intrigued him. It was during one of these evenings that he met Jacob Greathouse, a towering figure with a reputation that preceded him. Greathouse was known for his survival instincts, his cunning in the wild, and his brutal efficiency when dealing with threats. He saw potential in Simon, raw strength, an untamed will, and a hunger for something beyond milling grain. Greathouse introduced Simon to Bill Grills, a seasoned tracker and trapper with years of experience navigating the wilderness. Unlike Greathouse's rough and dangerous edge, Grills was a patient man, skilled in the art of reading the land and understanding its secrets. Together, they began instructing Simon in the ways of the frontier. Under their guidance, he learned how to move unseen through the forests, set traps, and prepare for life beyond the settlements. Meeting John Yeager and George Strader. One fateful evening, Simon encountered John Yeager and George Strader, two frontiersmen who had recently returned from a long trek through the western wilderness. Yeager was a grizzled veteran of the frontier, a man who had lived with the Mingos and understood the land like few others. Strader, younger and eager to forge his path, carried an infectious enthusiasm that complemented Yeager's wisdom. Simon met them in a local tavern, where he was drawn to their stories of the middle ground, the lands west of the Ohio River, filled with promise and peril. Yeager, always on the lookout for strong recruits, took an interest in Simon's growing skills and spirit. Over drinks and a roaring fire, the men spoke of their plans to return to Kentucky, a place of untapped opportunity and danger in equal measure. Simon listened intently, his heart pounding with excitement. For years, he had longed for a life beyond the mill, beyond the farmlands of Virginia. Here was his chance. Greathouse and Grills had taught him much, but it was Yeager and Strader who offered him a purpose, a way to step into the unknown and carve out his own destiny. The decision did not come lightly, but when the time came, Simon knew what he had to do. He thanked Jacob Butler, the miller who had given him a place to regain his strength, but his future was not in milling grain. It was in the wild. With Yeager, Strader, Greathouse, and Grills by his side, Simon Butler set out toward the untamed frontier, ready to claim his place in history. Through their guidance, Simon's survival skills sharpened and his understanding of the frontier deepened. More than just traveling companions, Yeager and Strader became his mentors, shaping him into the hardened frontiersman he was destined to become. Their journey toward Kentucky was just beginning, but Simon was no longer a lost boy. He was a man on the path to legend. This was only the beginning of Simon Kenton's journey. A runaway with a new name, carving out an existence on the fringes of the known world. But the frontier had much more in store for him. Battles, betrayals, and the making of a legend. His transformation from an aimless boy to a fearless frontiersman was far from complete. The untamed land would test him, forge him in the fires of hardship, and prepare him for a destiny he could never have imagined. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next chapter in the incredible tale of Simon Kenton. The wilderness is vast, and his adventure has only just begun. His story will continue, filled with danger, discovery, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.